Thanks.
Okay, well, a good morning, everyone who's joining us online, either in real time or you're watching this after the actual meeting has taken place online. This is the open part of the monthly delivery board meeting that we have, where I get to pose some of your questions to the senior leadership of Bedfordshire Police, but also to get an update on some of the work that they are doing to deliver on the police and crime plan, which is born out of a consultation with residents before it was drafted and published. So we have already spoken about some other sensitive areas of policing business in the closed section, but some of those areas we'll be able to bring into this section for you to be privy to. And so without further ado, who's doing the update? Do we have Dan here, or would you be taking that, Trevor?
Commissioner, I'll take it because Dan's
okay.
going to go to chair a national meeting.
Okay, so if you want to go ahead with that, please.
Yeah, so Commissioner, and those that watch this online, they'll be familiar that we are trying to pull papers together for each one of these boards to demonstrate all the activity that the force does in support of your plan. So today I'm focusing on priority area 4, which is placing residents and victims at the centre of policing priorities. And you know, this is a really transparent report that will demonstrate some areas where we need to improve and others where we think we're doing it well. So in terms of that priority, if you compare that with the Bedfordshire Police Annual Delivery Plan, which kind of maps across, there's an organisational theme of build upon existing partnerships and community relationships to keep Bedfordshire safe, and there's an operational objective of improve the victim experience. And in pleasingly, in September and October, our demand and strategy team did a review of how we're doing, an interim review of how we're doing, because they did a full one earlier in the year. So in terms of, I'll take the organisational theme first. In terms of the partnership and community relationships, and I will come back to this in a bit. Actually, the interim area report hasn't focused on this because it found in February that we thought we were doing pretty well here. So we were delivering collaborative and community engagement partnerships to support the public safety, maintain and understand the management of community tensions, and increase public confidence with partners in dealing with crime and disorder matters, and work with local partners and other forces on the SPR. But I'll come back to that in terms of the operational objectives to improve victim experience. So I'll start by saying, in addition to this is an area that we need to improve, and we recognise that. But in addition to the survey things and different things I'm going to come on to, I just do want to point out that I and other senior leaders do call victims ourselves to do our own verification of what surveys tell us, and we do it firsthand, and we do that at random. Because at the moment, the force does lack the sufficient capacity and capability to conduct a formal victim satisfaction surveys in the way that we would want to do. So that does hinder us with that. But that is an area, as I'll expand in a bit, that we have a change program wraps around. I don't know why I couldn't say satisfaction, but I fortunately can again now. In terms of, it's important just to map, there is a section in the report, Commissioner, that talks about the demand of different teams in the force. And when you look at that, you actually see that community policing, that's really important in all of this, is actually, it has moderate demand stretches on it, but there are other areas in the organisation that deal with vulnerable people that are stretched. And some of those are teams that are needing to keep victims updated, and so they do face high demand. Community cohesion is flagged within the report as a team that produces weekly community tensions and informs us about any potential tension, and that can be linked to national, international, or local events or things that have happened. That is recognised as national good practice. In terms of supporting victims, the Victims Code of Practice, and I know we spoke about some of this in part 1, in terms of the right to provide with information when reporting a crime. So the formal surveys that have been done of that show that in 90% of all cases that is done, and that was the last formally surveyed in January of this year. But clearly we want it to be in all cases. In terms of the right to be referred to services that support victims, the mandatory fields in crime recording processes ensure that all victims are automatically asked if they want to be referred to victim services. The process captures vulnerabilities, which should help us if we need special measures for court. And clearly we want a central record of this. The right to provide with information about investigation and prosecution. So our internal management audits and reviews by the force's internal auditors show that the force is providing regular VCOP updates to victims, although the updates in some cases lack the detail that we would want to give victims. So, for example, if someone's arrested and they're remanded to court, so a new victim site's being developed, which will help with that. It's going to contain videos on the rights, so we can explain what people should get. And in terms of the right to make a victim personal statement, the number of victims making a victim personal statement does continue to rise. And what we want is to definitely have one of those when anyone's got to go to court, and that is intended to prevent you being re-traumatized by explaining the impact on you because it's provided in a statement. Obviously, we'd like that to be for every victim, and that's where work continues on that. In terms of how we look to improve this area, Commissioner, one of the key drivers is the Victims and Witnesses Engagement Board. So that's chaired by the Force Head of Crime and Public Protection. It has a wide-reaching membership. And clearly that also reports into the cross-sector criminal justice board that you chair. And I won't go through the full terms of reference of it, but needless to say that the vision of that board, and it's got the right senior leaders at it, is to work in partnership to continually improve the quality of service for victims and witnesses across Bedfordshire. In terms of victim satisfaction surveys, the continuous improvement project is in place to develop the formal force victim satisfaction survey, and it's looking to expand the crime types we currently measure and do that in a way that doesn't need lots of human analysis, but it presents it so we can see it really clearly. So that work is ongoing, and it's looking like it'll be developed for kind of rollout in early 2023, and with that'll feed through your Criminal Justice Board. Bedfordshire Victim Care Services, you don't need me to tell you about this as it's your team, but referrals in there we did see some improvement on there, but they did peak in the summer, and we need to keep the focus on the referrals going into there, because obviously they can only provide those services if the force actually does the referral. So there is going to be a continued push to make sure we do that. And in terms of victim satisfaction data, I've said that at the moment the satisfaction surveys we're going to change so that we survey more crimes and more people, but the way we currently do it, they have been increasing anyway in terms of month on month. The highest proportion of respondents were very satisfied, although that proportion steadily declined, possibly in line with the increased numbers. And I won't go through the numbers. They aren't the numbers we'd want to see from a full survey. It's fair to say we want the numbers to be far wider reaching than that. In terms of
sorry to interrupt you. What do you think? What would you consider to be a satisfactory number to try and get to? I'm not trying to put you on the spot here in terms of having a target, but I mean the number is relatively low, even though it is gradually increasing. And I mean it's more than doubled since July until August, but it's still very, very tiny compared to the total number of interaction that your officers have. Exactly. What can be done to increase that?
If rather than put a figure on it, if it can be automated, then why don't we push it to as many victims as we can, so that they have the opportunity to do that, and then we'll have the best data set to respond to.
Is the capacity there to automate this process, though?
Well, that's what I'm hoping is delivered through the change project that's ongoing, because obviously looking for technology to solve that, and we know that technology doesn't struggle with numbers the way humans do. So that hopefully will be the key. But we will. I don't want to over promise and under deliver. So but we have got a change program looking at a solution, and it will involve technology.
What will be very good about the technology, if it does get introduced in automating this process, if it was free, I'll be very happy.
Well, if it can be delivered with using the technology we already have in a different way, you know, that would be ideal.
Okay.
Victims needs analysis. So clearly, you have a project manager in post from October. We'll be working with that individual to work on that. Support for police staff and officers. I think that's important to mention under this update, and I am just picking out a few bits of the report. But so victim care services, the Counselling Foundation offers support to our police officers and staff who become victims of crime. I think in the past, if you're a cop, we've kind of said, well, although you're a victim of crime, we kind of let you're a cop first and the victim second. And that actually, if you're a victim, you need to be able all the support that a victim of crime has. So you shouldn't be writing your own statement and those sorts of things.
And are we still, just sorry to interrupt here, Trevor, in terms of the support for officers and staff, do you have any idea what the uptake is of this support? I'm happy if Sean or anybody else wants to come in on this. And secondly, in terms of the assaults that your officers and staff are facing, are there any continuing trends here that is worth flagging up?
I'll start with the latter first. I think we still see a consistent high number of assaults against officers, predominantly officers, sometimes staff, PCSOs. That does concern me, and it's something we will continue to be really robust with. And, you know, I would really like it to be the case that body-worn videos shown not just in trials, but in guilty pleas as well, to see how a person may appear very different at court compared to what they did when they assaulted one of our officers or staff. So that those numbers continue to persist, and obviously we have a 9-point plan we put in response to any individual who's been assaulted, and clearly that starts with supervision, depending on the nature of assaults, but you know, can refer right up to specialist support. I think what we have done is we've started to remove any stigma from actually saying, you know, trying to kind of not let this sort of affected you if you've been a victim of crime. But we have got people coming forward as being a victim of all sorts of crimes. You know, we have got people coming forward as being victims of domestic abuse and those sorts of things. And again, we really encourage that, and we have internal support group around that. So we will continue to provide additional support for our officers and staff. And because particularly when you're victims of crimes which happen to you more than once, such as being assaulted over time, then that can have a kind of cumulative effect on individuals. So it is something that's, you know, we really look at that, and we also look at why if someone needs some extra training or something like that, if you know, if it's happened to them a number of times, we might need to revisit some training. But that is
something I was going to ask, Trevor, if you were satisfied with the level of personal safety training that officers were having. But I guess, you know, trying to make that a carte blanche resolution is probably not the most cost effective, but rather than a targeted one, as you're suggesting here. So that is happening, is it?
That's happening. We've had people, you know, there's no stigma. This isn't punitive. This is, you may have been a victim of assault a number of times, and, you know, is there something we want to do so that you're more confident in your personal defense tactics, or, you know, de-escalation tactics, those sorts of things. And, you know, we've got first class standards of training, but different people have different needs, and therefore if you think someone needs to you know, have some time to go and do more of that, then that's what we do.
Well, is there a mandatory retraining or refresher training for all officers on personal safety?
Yeah, fitness and personal safety have to be recertified on a regular basis. Sean's got his hand up, so maybe
Yes.
I'll pause and let
Sure.
him come in with some extra bits that we're doing on that.
Thank you, Chief. And Commissioner, just to reinforce that the Chief made an excellent point there, in the sense that when our officers are assaulted, they are victims of crime. And similarly to our victims of crime within our communities, where we want to see increased reporting, that's the similar pattern that we're seeing internally, because gone are the days where we expect people to say it's part of the job.
Yeah.
It is not part of the job.
Absolutely.
Assaults on our officers and any emergency workers should not be tolerated. And that's why I welcome an increase in reporting. It shows trust and confidence within the organisation to deal with it robustly. It illustrates the strength of the partnerships with the criminal justice system, because I talk regularly with magistrates' courts to make sure that the sentencing that they are pushing out is commensurate with the level of the assault. And then just to support some of the work that we do in terms of well-being, each assault is tiered according to the level of impact on that individual. So you may have something where somebody's pushed right through to verbal abuse. And I think sometimes we forget that, because an officer not only should not have to tolerate physical abuse, but they shouldn't have to tolerate racist abuse, because we get that from people that they come into contact with. And that tier is such that that dictates the level of contact that they get from senior management up to including members of the exec and the chief himself. So the support mechanism is there to support our officers, to encourage them to continue to report, make sure that they are supported throughout. But the underlying message is that we will not tolerate assaults on any form of emergency worker.
Thanks for that emphasis, Sean. I want to just, if I can just go back to something else before you go on, Trevor, around some of the community functions and some of the work that community teams are doing. It might be a little bit off track here, but I've had some queries around the priority setting meetings. I'm still not sure that these are being communicated well enough. I mean, again, you don't have to deal with this now, but something for you to be mindful of, that we still have a bit of a lottery. Some teams are a lot better than others in informing councillors and residents about the priority setting meetings. I've got a councillor, I think is from Toddington, who has been trying repeatedly to get some kind of outcome from the priority setting meetings. So if you can please perhaps look into this and just see how we can get a more uniform approach across the community teams in that regard. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, on that point, I'll take that away. We are committed to doing them. We will do it, and I'll make sure that the councillor in Toddington does get the answer. The other bit, obviously, we do encourage the team to do is, you don't always get the representation from across the community at those priority setting meetings. So I'm really encouraging the neighbourhood team not just to deliver priorities through those meetings, but actually to reach out to people in a different way, especially young people who don't always want to go to those meetings, but they have potentially different priorities to people that do, and so that we take account of those voices as well. And I know that Jackie Whitchard is, really sort of focusing on that as well. And Rachel will come in with
just before you do that, Rachel, I have been on the police.uk website, where, I mean, first of all, I've got to commend the force for having the names of the officers that are allocated to each community hub. I think that's brilliant. I mean, that's something that's been consistently improving over the last year or so. So that's excellent. One thing that I also noticed, though, is that not all the community hubs have got an updated priority outcomes for their areas. Some areas have got a very comprehensive report of the previous priority setting meeting and what has been decided and what they're working on. Some have got none at all. So it's either the meeting didn't take place, or they just haven't, you know, had the time or whatever to upload that for residents to see. And I think it would also be good if that was updated, then residents can actually say, look, you know, maybe what the councillors have registered as a priority, that's not what we're talking about. And obviously that'll be for the councillors to deal with their residents, but at least from a point of openness and transparency, I think it would be good to have that populated appropriately. Sorry, Rachel.
No, Commissioner, I was just going to say that I think when we move on to the next item, which is community policing, we'll cover off the priority setting meetings. Mr. Basra's got some information regarding that.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay,
Sorry,
so
Trevor, go ahead.
that's fine. And so if I move into HMIC FRS assessments of some of these areas. So in terms of the victim service assessment, so this is some area where it's a mixed bag, but we know we need to improve, and that is one of the areas. And some of this relates to our control room in terms of having the right number of resources in there, and some of it relates to our investigative teams and supervision of those teams. So, that's the two key highlights really there. So, is around supervision. We've mentioned that before, but that comes out here. If we get those two bits right, then the VSA the victim service assessment will be better. Also on HMIC, in terms of placing residents and victims at the centre of policing, we should also reflect that Bedfordshire Police are graded as good at engaging and treating the public fairly and with respect. And of the 21 forces that had their assessments done by the time this report was done in September, there was only one other that had a better judgment than that. The force, and just a couple of things there. So the force has an effective community policing model aligned with local authority boundaries. The force problem solving culture is well developed. Community policing officers are no longer routinely removed from community problem solving work. And again, I may have mentioned this in previous meetings, but the force spent 10.4% of its budget on community policing, which is more than the average across England and Wales, which is 8.8%. And that's significant for us in terms of the investment. The force's community policing strategy, effective management, and community policing teams play an essential role in supporting the force's response to serious and organised crime, and we support them with analytical resource. So, but the inspection judged as requiring improvement on investigating crime, as I've said, and there's three key areas for us in terms of investigation plans, supervision of those, and improved compliance with the victims code. So that's the area we're focused on, and also we were adequate at protecting vulnerable people, and the main area of improvement there required was to resource this multi-agency safeguarding hub. I can now say here on the meeting that we have fully resourced our complement of the multi-agency safeguarding hub. So that is an area that improvement has been made. So that's a kind of high level summary, Commissioner, and happy to take any other questions.
So what is with the MASH, the multi-agency safeguarding hub? When was that? When did that become fully resourced?
I think we've had it like that for a few months now. Demand, actually, we got rid of all the backlogs in there, albeit I'm now told that the backlogs are starting to emerge because the hub itself is, it's consumed a lot of work, and now I guess there's a lot more confidence in it. It's getting more in there, so we may have to revisit that, but it's because it's a high demand area. But at the moment, as I say, it's fully resourced to what we'd agreed at the time. But we'll continue to look at that through our budgeting.
That is good. I mean, you've highlighted on this, and of course, the HMI report also highlights this. The VCOP is an area of concern. I'm glad that you're putting in systems in place to address that and to make sure that that's been compliant. In terms, Sean, you mentioned in the closed section about a dashboard that's been created now that kind of tracks pretty much. Do you mind just explain that a little bit more? I think that would be hopefully quite reassuring for residents to hear.
Yeah, so just to cover a couple of bits there that you've talked about and the Chief's highlighted, Commissioner. So first, we have evolved our own data set in relation to VCOP. So initially, the data set that we presented highlighted VCOP as a whole, and that might show great compliance as a whole. But what we need to do is understand the 12 pillars, because the Victims Charter under the Victims Code of Practice has got 12 pillars. So now our dashboard will dig into each of those 12 areas and extract that information. So we'll be able to find out where we're strong and where we need to continue to be so, but also where our gaps are. And some of those may not necessarily just be in-force ones, because that's where the relationships with our AOJ and criminal justice teams come into play. But now we'll have that information available to us so we can dig deep into that and identify those issues.
And just lastly on this, before we move on to the next segment, I mean, as you know, I'm very, very keen on the way that the force is able to engage with residents, especially victims of crime. And this kind of ongoing keeping people up to date was something that was, flagged up by the inspection report. Are there systems that can be put in place or that can be looked into to automate that? So you don't have to have the kind of manual element to it. Yeah. I know we touched on this in the closed section.
Yeah, what we do have is we do have that system where some of it and the vast majority of it can be automated. Now, the issue that we have with solely automating that is that will bring out data. What it won't do is bring out free text. So we haven't evolved that technology to pick out keywords. So we might just say 10 people were satisfied on this, 12 people weren't satisfied on this. So what we need to do is two things. One, identify keywords that we then want to extract, but then B, go into looking at the detail and see why people aren't satisfied. Now that takes physical resource. And at the moment, as you know, Commissioner, in terms of police officers, we're prioritising our patrol function and our community function because of the services they provide, and our police staff within the control room, because that's first and foremost what we have to do, answer the calls to emergencies. So at the moment, as you're a great supporter of, we're going through priority-based budgeting in terms of identifying our service levels across the organisation. And where we may be able to move resources around, one of the options and possibilities is to support victim care. So we'll have the data, but then we physically need people to extract the information out of it and then cycle it back into frontline policing to make those improvements.
Commissioner, could I just come in with another point as well? So right now we're approaching 400 of our officers being students, learning how to be officers, but they won't be students forever. And throughout their journey, along with the rest of the workforce, we impress upon them putting victims at the heart of everything we do. And therefore, it's really important not just to go and respond to something that's happening now, but to update a victim when you say you're going to do it. Shift patterns and all those things sometimes mean expectations have to be managed, but when there's a significant update, a victim should be told. So, that is a culture that we will continue to drive forward across the force, particularly as we've got a young workforce that's, very much in a kind of growing and learning part of it. But our investigative teams are growing as well in terms of they've had significant gaps, and as that improves, they look after really vulnerable victims, and they do an amazing job. And as you know, we've got victim engagement officers in those areas to really give victims who have suffered really crimes that need specialist engagement, such as domestic abuse, serious sexual offences. They will get allocated a victim engagement officer who's an absolute specialist in looking after their needs.
Well, it will be really good to get an update in the coming months on the implications of some of the new measures you're bringing in. I think it'll be really good to see how that is having an outcome in terms of compliance with VCOP. So perhaps something that we can touch on in about next quarter. I think that'll be really, really helpful.
Yeah,
Just to
we'll
see
bring that
the,
back.
I mean, I don't expect it to be perfect. I mean, if it was perfect, that would be great. But at least if the line of, if the direction of movement is positive and is in, then I think, you know, that is something that would be very good. Okay, is that your update done for part 9?
Yes.
Trevor? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And now it's number 10, around community policing report. Sean?
Rachel's going to start and then I'll pick up.
Okay, Rachel?
Okay, so I'm just going to start in relation to the numbers on community policing, Commissioner. So obviously the report that we were referring to was last month's report, which I think shows that there was 59 officers within community policing. That this month has now dropped to 57, and 6 of those vacancies sit within Luton. However, there have been people that have been recruited into vacancies. We're just at a bit of a position at the moment that we know what the pipeline is, we know what the abstractions are coming over the horizon, but we need to maintain our new patrol function at the moment. So we'll be revisiting the position in January 23 to start moving officers over. Whilst there's less, well, there's not less, but whilst the vacancies are held within Luton, then obviously Superintendent Whitchard has good oversight of that. And in terms of operational activity, then she moves her resources around accordingly to make sure that the communities are getting what they need. So that's the update in relation to the numbers.
In terms of people moving in and out, do we know the main reasons why that movement happens? And are we actually tracking the average time that officers spend in community before they move on?
Yeah, I mean, most of them are in there for quite a number of years. It's just people that want to spread their wings, learn a different area of the organisation, to develop themselves. But also there is other people that have chosen to, and then there's obviously officers have decided to go and specialise in things like roads policing and firearms. But there's also this small element that transfer to other forces. But yeah, I don't think we necessarily track what the return on investment is, but from coming from community policing world, certainly the majority of the team that I worked with 3 years ago are still there now. So we're quite confident that people are in there for quite a long period of time.
Before you come in, Sean, is there I want to just find out, is there a limit, a minimum requirement for those who apply to come to community to stay in that team for a certain period of time? Maybe 2 years, a year?
Yeah, I don't think there is. No, there's not a formal tenure. However, you know, it's those conversations regarding movement of individuals, what's best for communities, what's best for them, and obviously that return on investment of those skills that they've been given.
And is that not something that could be considered, or you don't think that from an operational point of view, it's viable for people to have to, if you apply, because now people are applying rather than, you know, being, shall I say, encouraged to go into community. If they're doing that, would it not be worthwhile having them commit to a certain period of time, given the fact that they need to know the area, know the people there, know the community, and the community will know them as well? I mean, I would have thought.
Commissioner, I know that the Chief's got his hand up, but I don't think we would want to be that restrictive. You know, people are actively now seeking to be part of the community policing teams. It's not that we're having to pressurise people at all. You know, people absolutely want to go into there. It's a great opportunity for officers to go out there, be really proactive within their communities, engage with people, and target perpetrators as well. So I don't think it certainly doesn't have the stigma that perhaps it had a number of years ago. Yeah. So I don't think that that's something that we actually would want or need to implement.
I get
we
that.
Want to clip people's wings.
I get that. My concern, I mean, I'm aware of cases where a new PC has come into a community and within a couple of months, they're not there anymore. And that does, because for councillors and for residents who proactively actually try to reach out and engage with their community officers, which is going great, the next thing they know is that a new person has come in and the whole process starts all over again. I just think that would be something worth considering. And if you want me to provide you with some examples of cases where people have raised this and the issues it creates for them, because different offices have different styles of working. Some are very, very much out there and they make themselves available. Some just get on with the job, but are not as engaged. So when you have the sudden change in personnel, then the communities now have to adjust all over again to a new person. But I just think it would be worthwhile you considering having a tenure in place in community, given the level of investment we're making into it and the impact this has directly on communities as well. Sorry, Trevor.
And Commissioner, what you just said about residents, I fully accept. I guess my position on this is I'm opposed to the tenure, and the reason I say it is this. Firstly, it's not a risk area for us. You get some really talented people who want to go into community, and we might get a lot out of them in 18 months or 2 years. But who, because they, are looking to get promoted and develop themselves, may in fact be put off from going in there by a tenure, restricting their ability possibly to take a promotion opportunity. And so I think that could have an adverse impact on people either not going there or even leaving the force. So I think it's an area if we get the environment right, people enjoy it, they will want to stay. But if we've got really talented people who look to progress, then it should be seen as a place actually where you actually become a better police officer for experiencing it. And I think because of the blend of people who go there and just love it and stay, and those that go there enjoy it but then move on, that gives us a kind of right amount of corporate memory balance with individuals moving through the organisation in a way that doesn't cause frustrations to individuals and cause them to be sort of disengaged because they feel either trapped or, as I say, put off talent that we might become much better talent because of their experience in there. So that's I guess where we are at the moment, but we always obviously will keep that under review.
I mean, ultimately, it's an operational thing, and that's your area. You decide who goes where and for how long. But I have got to articulate to you one of the most common things raised by residents when we have some of these cluster meetings about community policing. But what I would ask you to do, if you don't mind, is to look into the average time an officer spends in community before they end up moving to another team. It would just be good to have an idea. Maybe evidentially there's nothing for me to worry about, and I'm only just hearing about the outliers, right? From people, and that does happen sometimes. I only hear about the exceptions rather than the norm. But it would be good to kind of get an evidence of that. How long people tend to stay in community for. If you can look in, I mean, there's no time limit for you to let me know when this. I don't need it tomorrow, but it would just be good to have an idea.
Yeah, we'd take an action to look at the average.
Yeah, brilliant. Sean, I think it's you next.
Yeah, I was only going to build upon what Rachel said, Commissioner, and some of the conversation you had with the Chief in relation to priority setting meetings, some of the structures and how we promote community policing. First of all, I wholeheartedly agree with you in the sense that we probably need to be a little bit slicker with our comms. We do engage with our communities, we do listen to them, but maybe where we fall short is feeding back on those conversations and then what we've done. But in terms of those meetings, what we've got to do is we can't provide the same service. And when you talked about consistency, that probably doesn't fit all our communities, because we follow the guidelines of community policing, of which there are a number of pillars. One is engaging communities, and it says that we should have a visible response in communities and tailor our response to those local communities and partners. So some communities will want face-to-face meetings, others will want online, want social media. So at the moment, what we are doing with all of our communities is we're encouraging them all to complete a simple 1-minute survey. And what that does, it highlights what they think should be local priorities, but also how they want to engage, whether it be through social media, whether it be to face-to-face. And what we will do is we will then provide that service that they require and that they desire. So if it is face-to-face, we'll provide that. If it's social media, we'll provide that. So we are going to listen to our communities, and rather than provide the same service across the board, we'll provide bespoke services so that all can be engaged. And we're starting to do that in certain areas. And I know we've already had some great results and great outcomes as a result of some of that interaction where we've listened and had that opportunity for people to highlight problems. And ultimately what we want to do is work with our partners to solve those problems for the long term. And I'm sure, Commissioner, you'll remember in the early part of the summer, we had reports within Leighton Buzzard of ASB, where there was graffiti, and then also in those communal outdoor spaces, there was some damage to table tennis tables that had been put in there for our local youths. Now, as a result of that, we brigaded some of the other community teams to support the Leighton Buzzard Hub, for example, our CET. And we put a dedicated operation around it, Operation Pentagon. And in relation to the table tennis incident, 5 youths were dealt with positively. Every one of them had a positive outcome. In terms of the graffiti, 7 were arrested, and again, every one of them had a positive outcome. Now, when I talk about that positive outcome, it's really important that that work was then coincided with, for example, local diversionary groups, the council, and other partners within that area. So and the ultimate level of success is not only have we seen ASB reduce in Leighton Buzzard, but I haven't had those calls that, you know, we've got some very vocal councillors and MPs in that area saying that this is continued. So the system that we've got in place does work. What we need to do is roll it out to all of the community teams and all of the communities. So what they have is equal opportunity to contact, communicate with, engage with, and get that service.
So thank you for that, everyone. I really appreciate your feedback and your insights from an operational point of view as well in terms of what is being done. But what I'm talking about in terms of consistency of expectations that residents will have will be, for example, so I've just gone onto the police.uk website. When you have the time, you go and look at this. I think one of the exceptional examples of a good standard of information being made available to residents is the Luton North and West Hub. They have got the action points of what they have done, even down to patrols being carried out. Absolutely brilliant. And they've got on there details of when they're going to have their next meetings. People can then plan in advance. They've got even days to March 2023. But some community hubs have got absolutely zero.
And that's the consistency where I say I agree with you. That's the consistency that we do need to have in terms of feedback, but in terms of a consistent approach of how to gather that feedback.
Oh, no.
Tailored.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about in terms of, if I lived in any part of Bedfordshire and I want to go to see when is going to be the next priority setting meeting for my area, I should be able to go on the website, plug in my my postcode, and they've got, I have to commend the Luton North and West team. I've not been through all of them, but some of the others have got absolutely not sufficient information, whereas they've just got a calendar that goes almost for a whole year.
Yeah.
If I want to plan in advance, I can be a part of that. Sorry, Trevor, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Commissioner, I agree with you on that. Firstly, thanks. We'll pass on your compliments to those teams that have done that well, and we will simply ask the other teams to do it the same as that, please. So we will do that. Yes,
really great. Thank you for that. Yes, are you still going? You just have some more to report on the community policing there, Trevor? Sean? Okay, brilliant. Thanks. And also, thank you for just maintaining the establishment as best as you can. I understand this is going to fluctuate from month to month, and there are lots of moving pieces and people have aspirations to go into other areas, as Rachel alluded to. But for the most part, I want to thank you for keeping to your commitment of minimizing the abstraction rates and minimizing the vacancy rate as well, even though I know that I'm very, very mindful of other pressures in other parts of the business. So thank you all for that. I want to just move into number 11, which is the Voice of the Public section. This is where I get to ask some of my own questions based on recent happenings in policing, and also some questions from members of the public, which they've sent in. I guess the one I want to ask, which is quite pressing, Trevor, is around the Casey review, which was made for very, very disturbing reading for colleagues, your colleagues in the Met. I guess I just need some kind of reassurance from you about what is being done to make sure that as a chief, as a senior officer in Bedfordshire, you and your senior leadership have got your fingers on the pulse of the culture within your organization, and what you plan to do to make sure that those kind of absolutely disturbing outcome that was discovered in the Casey review is not happening in Bedfordshire, and if it is, that you're dealing with it.
Okay, I'm glad you've asked me that, because I actually wanted the opportunity to be able to, particularly as this is a public section of the meeting, to say something on this.
Okay.
It is a really concerning report to read. And I think my assessment of how I would distinguish where we are here to obviously what seems to be the position in the Met right now is we saw concerning things of that nature, not necessarily to the extent that's in that report, but here in 2019. And that caused us to make the culture of the organisation the #1 priority at that time. And some of the things we saw were disproportionate referrals of Black, Asian, minority ethnic officers to professional standards. That was one of the issues in the Casey report. Mm-hmm. Confidence in reporting and knowing that would be dealt with and the outcomes would be right. And a number of other things in the workplace. So in terms of that, over the last 3 years, and there virtually hasn't been a quarter that's gone by where there has not been tangible activity in relation to culture of the organisation. We've absolutely focused on the culture of the organisation and difficult conversations, and particularly we focused on first and second line managers to begin with, and they were sessions led by the whole of the executive with all of our first and second line managers, and that included a section from me on live life experience of some individuals in our organisation, so that I could make it really spell out clearly. And that included people being either asked to do evidence their competence more than a white colleague, or possibly being referred to professional standards where just because someone avoided a difficult conversation. Now, what I'm pleased to say is that we've gone from a position where there was some disproportionality in the system in referrals to professional standards to one where there is now not. So we do not have disproportionate referrals of Black, Asian and minority ethnic colleagues into professional standards, and we don't have any disproportionality in the outcomes, that's the decision makings. And in addition to the whole of the workforce, but I particularly singled out first and second line managers there because that's where standards are set and where early decisions are made. There's also been a real focus on the professional standards side of things. And one of the things that is there is a highly effective independent scrutiny of their decision making by a panel of individuals who you would have expert in cultural awareness because of lived life experience and other backgrounds, and they're able to give opinions on cases before final decisions are made. And that has made a big change. And then if you add to that, we have what's recognised has been put in place, some of the most effective independent scrutiny of our coercive powers, so stop and search. That extends to use of force, road traffic checks, all of where we look for disproportionate outcomes, either internal or external. Bedfordshire's is in a good place in terms of, you know, this directly feeds into the race action plan. I gave you a detailed run through where we are with that in part one. But our plan is mature and it is advanced, and it has been going for some time, and again plays into a number of these areas. And internally, we've done lots with the workforce to encourage reporting of any behaviour that's not in line with the values of the organisation. And, you know, that reporting has gone up. And it's not because we're seeing a rise in concerning behaviour, it's because we're seeing confidence in reporting and a zero tolerance in behaviours that of few that might let the many down. So, you know, there will always be something in any force that, you know, the chief's sitting there and doesn't know is happening. But all I can say is this has been a consistent focus for 3 years, and we've seen the dial shift in terms of the data that we've looked for, understood and explained and sought to change. And I do think Bedfordshire, because of that work, is in a different position and further along that journey than was described in that report.
Yeah, the one thing I commend you and obviously Gary, who played a very key role in getting this off the ground with some of the other groups that you've got in the force. The DSG, for example, obviously you've got some of the executive team on the call as well, and the work that they've all done over the years in getting this off the ground. And I think it's great. It's really pleasing to hear that as a leadership team, you are taking this seriously. You are on top of it, and it's not just in word, and things are being done. I'm just always somewhat paranoid about the things that we don't know, which hits the fan, and well, I didn't know about this. So we can't always know everything. I get it. As long as you're satisfied that you and your team are doing everything you can to be as aware of what is happening in your business as you can, I can live with that. And that proactive, approach continues. And you would always have my support for doing that. Always.
And it will continue.
Good. So I've got pretty much about 3 other questions that I want to ask you. Are you able to give an update on the emergency duty team and the appropriate adults issue, which I know continues to be a concern, because police officers still continue to spend, in my view, a lot of their time doing what is not a police officer's job. And I know that you and some of the chief execs were going to meet to discuss this. Can I get an update on that, please?
Yeah, I guess I'll focus on a couple of areas. Firstly, appropriate adults. I don't think we're seeing the problem in getting them. I think we've progressed that.
Good.
The EDT, so that emergency duty team, there's 2 things we predominantly ask of them, which is one is to answer the phone, which they do when we've got an out of hours, typically, a child that will need specialist accommodation and we shouldn't be in the care of the police but needs support. That's where the pressure is in the system. So we still see long delays in transferring that individual from our care into the care ultimately of the local authority, because they're placed into the suitable accommodation. So that is a pressure. You're right, we did have a conversation the other day where we've agreed that there's some wicked problems in the system and we need to continue to work together to resolve, because we shouldn't have cops essentially looking after people that shouldn't be being looked after by the police. Yeah. And the other areas I guess I would mention is we still find our officers spending too much time at A&E before they're able to let someone who effectively is not under arrest go into sort of medical care. And also we do spend time going to, what missing persons, but really they're not missing. They just left child's left a home, accommodation looked after setting that they're in, and they're effectively not there and not returning, but are not really missing because the staff know where they are. So that's another area of focus for us. I recognise that other agencies are under pressure and we need to work together to resolve these. And, we do that really effectively with mental health street triage. That where we put an officer, a paramedic and a mental health worker together to deal with tricky situations on the street. That works well. There's just these other pressures where, you know, there is a pressure on the system, but it isn't right that police officers are being asked to do what they do, and we need to progress that. So I expanded it more than the question you asked, but you know, I know those are areas of concern that we share.
Yeah, you know, look, I totally understand that every one of these emergency services are stretched. Ambulance, for example, I get that. But certainly, one thing I do not want to see happen is for the default position being, well, the police officers from Bedfordshire will go there, and if they're there, there's no point in us in an ambulance, and they can transport a vulnerable person in a police car to A&E. I don't think that's the best use of taxpayers' money through their precepts, and I'm glad you know, people are now talking together. We'll keep this on the agenda, you know, for the future to get an update, and Anna will continue to work with your team and partners as well to get this sorted out. So thanks for that update. Also, can you give an update on findings from the Force Control Room with the AWS, especially in terms of call volumes? And this kind of links to the previous question about where these calls are coming from and how many of them are police-related calls.
Yeah, so I'll do it in general terms, and other colleagues may come in with some detail if you require it. But in essence, the volume of calls and online conversations that go into our control room have continued to increase, and they've increased over a period of time. So the average about a year ago was probably more than 1,000 calls, less than it is now. That is, and Commissioner, I'm just checking you're still there, because
yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, but in essence, we have looked at that in great detail, and the pressure for the force here and now is we are below the strength we should be in the control room to provide the service we want to the public. And despite incredible work by the people in there who are operating under pressure, we, you know, are not delivering the service in terms of timeliness of being able to answer everything in the way we'd want to. However, that's primarily for non-emergency. However, we are confident that the resourcing levels in there would have improved by the end of the financial year. That sort of addresses the here and now. But what we're also seeing is the demand continuing to rise, and also demand which is not for the police coming into that room. So if I give you an example, we have a technical solution now that looks at the web chat that comes into our force, and 30% of that can be diverted to other places because we're being phoned when it's not for the police. We get
30%.
30% of our web chats are queries which are not for the police to answer, therefore other agencies, and what we end up doing is signposting people. So we have a technical solution now that provides that in an automated way, so that you only engage with our operatives once we've filtered that out. And our ambition is to be able to do that for voice calls, for non-emergency voice calls, because again, if the percentage is the same, you can see how that clogs up, slows down the system, even if it's a very short call to say, you need to ring this agency or that agency and not the police. And that's what we're, determined to bring into Bedfordshire. Otherwise, when we get those resources at the level they should be, it won't be long before they aren't enough, and we won't be able to afford to keep increasing that.
Well, it would be really good, Trevor, if we can get something that kind of maps across to the voice service and see if the indications are about the same, because a 30% volume of calls that are not police-related calls is quite significant. Yeah,
it is. And that's the key to us being able to manage the demand and then improve the service to the public who really need us to speak to us on the phone.
Might it be worthwhile just digging deeper? If you don't have that data, it would be good to just look into that and get that to me another time to see where those referrals are going to. Is it going to local authority? Is it going to fire? Is it going to ambulance? Where is it going? I mean, are we having people calling about their bin collections, for example? It would be good to kind of know where the people are being referred to.
Yeah, and it will be a variety of different agencies. But what I won't be able to do just yet is the voice bit, but we can do it through the web chat. So we should be able to give
Great.
a sense of how you break that 30% down.
Excellent, brilliant, thanks. So the next question, again, somewhat relates to the force control room. This has been raised multiple times, and so this is coming via email in terms of reporting using the online system. I'm not sure if the tech innovation you've got addresses this, but it's about using the web form. It's very complicated. They're saying that the feedback has been that the forms website are so specific and hard to complete. So they want a specific incident of reporting a find of drugs, for example. So those who are reporting are unaware if the force has got the communication submitted or if they're picking it up. So it's back to this feedback when people report things. Are you aware of this situation?
So Sean might come in, but there's two things before he does. One, we've just gone to single online home for some reporting. So very recently, the way you can report certain things into the police has changed. So that would have improved probably that system, but also the web chat, which is when you're talking to our control room. You know, if that is a policing matter, ultimately you and it can't be resolved by our automated answer, then you should be able to get through to a person. But Sean, perhaps I could just bring you in there, because I could tell by the way your camera came to life that you were poised to say something on this.
Yeah, I suppose on this one, without fudging the issue, we probably need to know the detail of how, because there are different ways of contacting us. So you can go through websites, etc., apps, and you can do report, which is for crime, traffic, missing people, and things like that. You can do tell us about certain things. And then in addition to that, you've got the chat. Because we've only just rolled out the chat is something that, again, we want to bring in gradually, because we want to make sure that we've got it right. So what we don't want is people to be hanging around there. So I suppose it's just which area of it is it that you can't, because again, we've had positive feedback, because another mechanism that you can contact us is to make complaints or make thanks. And we've had positive contact to say, oh, it was so easy for me to report a crime. And if you do that online, you'll get an automated response in terms of the OIC, reference numbers, etc. So if there's a particular part that isn't working, then we will be committed to get it fixed.
I mean, maybe we'll just go back. I'll have the office go back to the person who sent the email, and then we can maybe just get some specifics there. The last thing I want to just ask is regarding this incident on the A1. Now, I know might it be worthwhile just clarifying the police powers, how they were used. You probably did the Beeston area, the vigil, which John Murphy kindly provided a report, and I think it would be worthwhile just mentioning the police response to that. Basically, there was just some concern that there were some very obvious violation of road traffic rules, with people doing wheelies and driving quite irresponsibly. And will there be any further actions to be taken against those people if there's video evidence to prove that? Yeah.
So Commissioner, again, I know we've provided you a written response, which you know which contains a lot of detail. I guess I would summarise it like this. Obviously, I do recognise that an individual lost his life, which is why there was a vigil there, and obviously sympathies to that, the family and friends of the individual. In terms of the people that wanted to do this particular vigil, which is obviously on the A1 on a Friday evening, there wasn't full compliance with us. We had 24 hours notice that was going to take place, and therefore we did work with that the best we could and prepared to enforce, and we served notices on that and effectively gave them 15 minutes for that. But it is right that you know, that was a difficult policing matter. It did go off with minimal disruption because of how we worked with highways and others to put it in place. And actually there was some enforcement at the time. So 2 cars were seized and some other notices issued. We have got the footage. If there's blatant evidence of road traffic offences or other offences, then that's still being scrutinised at the moment. So, you know, it's as I say, it wasn't something where we had the full cooperation of those involved. And we did put the maximum restrictions we could in place, but also respecting that someone did lose their life, and therefore a 15-minute vigil, given the strength of feeling around that, was something that we facilitated. But obviously we're prepared if needed to remove people if they didn't comply with that. And by and large, it was, with the exception of the bits you mentioned, which is some irresponsible use of vehicles. Right.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, that's reassuring that, you know, as long as it's still open, that if people are found to have violated the rules, then action will be taken against them, and they'll be getting, you know, fixed penalty notices or whatever. Okay, that's brilliant. That's all the questions that I've got here. Next agenda item we've got for November, which is around forced inclusion and equality. Update on the special constabulary and recruitment and well-being and welfare updates. And by the way, Trevor, thank you very much for dropping in to have that meeting with the special constables. They were very, very pleased with that. I mean, one of them did drop me a message, say it was a really, really good thing to have you join them, and the picture was fantastic as well. I thought it was great.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, they're a brilliant bunch of individuals, and the force couldn't achieve what it does without their contribution. So we're really grateful for what they do, and I think we're going to do some more days with them like that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Rachel, did you have your hand up?
I did, Commissioner, but I'll pick it up afterwards. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, that is the end of the meeting. Thank you all very much for all you do. Really appreciate the reports and the time you spend into putting them together. I really appreciate that, and thank you for your leadership in the force as well. Much obliged, and we shall see you again. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.